welcome everyone to the session on governance of nature-based solutions, particularly focusing on enablers and barriers. So this is a panel discussion where we've got panelists from each of the REGREEN and Clearing House projects. They'll provide a quick 5-minute overview of some of the key insights, and then we'll open things up for discussion. I'll start with a few questions and others can chip in. Before we get down to the presentations, I just quickly want to introduce myself. First of all, I'm Duncan Russell. I'm from the University of Exeter, and I'm involved in the REGREEN project on the governance work package. Our speakers, our panelists today are, first of all, we have Clive Davis from the University of Newcastle, who is with the Clearing House project. Then we have Xiaoli Jin from the Chinese Academy of Forestry, who is also from the Clearing House project. The next panelist who will speak is Anna Jensen, who is a senior scientist at the University of Aarhus, who is part of REGREEN. And then finally, we have Richard Hardiman, who's a fellow at the Hebrew University and, again, part of the REGREEN project. We've got a really good mix of panelists here, so I'm really excited to hear what they have to say about governance and nature-based solutions. So I'll stop talking and hand over to people who've probably got something more interesting to say. So over to you, Clive.
Thank you very much. The starting point for any project is to understand where you've come from. And I suppose in scientific terms, we call that the state of the art. So the very first thing that we did in the Clearing House project is to try to identify where we are. So the way that we did that was looking at examples, and we identified 20 examples in both China and Europe, and then subjected those 20 examples to a coding exercise to draw out key themes. We also picked up an idea from an earlier FP7 project, which was called Green Surge, which was looking at urban green infrastructure, where they made use of what were called planning families, which was like a grouping together of planning systems in Europe. We looked at these case studies and came up with 10 initial findings. First of all, and this came up earlier on today from our speaker from the European Commission, almost all of the nature-based solutions that we were able to identify are led by the public sector. I suppose the opposite side of that is that the private sector is notably underrepresented. What we found is that NBS is often not known by name, even when it could be classified as such. Maybe this is slowly changing. That was an interesting point. Especially in Europe, and this is a very important point, I think, we found that urban forestry as a nature-based solution is normally project-based rather than at a city-wide scale. Longer-standing projects, perhaps this is a smart thing, reinvent themselves to meet new ideas. Or really are these just the same ideas that have been repackaged for a new kind of era? And also, these projects, long-standing projects, are good at plugging into new funding opportunities. We found that the scale of interventions is generally on a much greater spatial scale in China than in Europe, and is significantly policy-driven. And we'll be hearing from Xiaoli about the Chinese Academy of Forestry and the National Forest Grasslands as well. We didn't find any particular correlation with the planning families. We didn't think it was a significant issue. Governance in China could be characterized as more top-down than in Europe, but we found also that we didn't want to over-exaggerate that particular finding. Participatory approaches are well established in Europe, and that there are a myriad of common issues between Europe and China. And two that came out was over the issue of land supply, getting enough land to do urban forestry, and the need for better collaboration between lead organizations. So what key points are rising? Well, the first thing is we found support for the findings of researchers Ian Bulkley. Harriet Bulkley is well known in our field, that at present UFNBS governance is presently skewed towards project governance rather than city governance. That in Europe, city government requires an evolution of current urban planning processes to enable the widespread adoption of it at a high level. That in Europe, at least a strong focus on the project level and the well-established narrative on ecosystem services provision is a good bridge between science and practice, and that a variety of governance models exist. And I think the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment and ecosystem approach is clearly very valuable in that respect. In China, with its more dynamic and growing economy, master plans set out a high-level policy of the city and other local plans, but there is definitely a more disaggregation and subsidiarity at work in Europe. Finally, policy planning, policy and delivery. This is the wrong slide. Let's go back. No, it isn't. This is actually, sorry, my approach. I've actually done a presentation for a group I'm not in, because can't be in two places at the same time. So the guideline on planning, policy and delivery, you will find a sheet of paper out there with a summary on it.
Recording in progress.
Do I have to repeat myself now? Going back to the beginning, that'll drive Lawrence nuts. Sorry, not Lawrence, yeah. Ensure that urban forest plans deliver at least 3 goals. Contribute to health and well-being, integrate into all new development, and maximize close to nature living. That in governance, that participation is very important, particularly if we're to overcome resistance to NBS as an alternative to other grey infrastructure approaches. And that in institutional terms, we must enhance interdepartmental collaboration rather than silo thinking, strengthen the public-private partnership to make it more of an equal, enhance collaboration with non-governmental organizations, some really good examples, but equally projects where there are none, integrate municipal plans and policies with urban forest management, and finally, a role for us all, I think, to be strong advocates for the benefits of trees. I've been called perfect for other things, but anyway, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jiali Jin from Chinese Academy of Forestry. Because I just uploaded a wrong slide, so the slides will be a little bit longer, but I just prepared the notes, and I will be finish my presentation in time. So today, I'm happy that I have this opportunity to introduce the China's National Forest City Program, and also Clive mentioned this morning. Okay, so well, first let us see what is the National Forest City in China. So it means a city comprising an ecosystem which is dominated by the forest and trees, the mountains, rivers, and the lakes, forests, farmlands, and the grassland create a resilient system across urban, peri-urban, and rural areas. So it was launched by the China's National Forestry and Grassland Administration since 2004 and has a history of more than 20 years. The whole development progress can be divided into 5 main stages, just shown in this slide. The most important milestones during the past 3 decades of the National Forest City Program also show in this timeline table. And actually, at the very early stage of the National Forest City Program, the government only developed a very simple and general document to guide the urban forest city construction. And then with more and more cities, they apply for this title and they join these initiatives. The government realized they need to do more to make it more standardized, to let the cities know what they actually need to do. So the government started to collaborate with the researchers from the academic institutions and also universities, which focus on the urban forestry, urban landscape ecology, and other related research fields to develop more specific key performance indicators to guide the cities how to construct a real urban forest city. So now in these Thai slides you can see there has the key performance indicators, because I won't introduce more about these indicators, but you can find more introduction in the table outside our room. And then you can see the practice of the National Forest City Program in the last 2 decades has proved that the forest city creation can enhance the ecological resilience, such as increasing the urban biodiversity, also the quality of the urban vegetation, also reconnecting the urban green corridors. Here, just the maps of the Beijing, you can see they improve the qualities of the urban forest only in the plain area, which is the city most urbanized area in the city. And also it can help to enhance this is the right one, the social resilience. For example, it can enhance the it can satisfying the public needs for recreation, also improving the social interaction, and as well as providing more places for the ecotourism and creating more green jobs for the local communities. So here is the whole cycle for the Forest City program. They have the KPIs. They require the co-design, the co-learning progress. Also, they need the master plan for the Forest City construction. And they also will ask the experts to review the whole progress of the urban forest city recreation. So also we have some challenges. For example, we still have the land use conflicts because the government wants to plant more trees in the cities, but also the cities need the development. New buildings are also happened in the city center, also in the peri-urban area. And also, the government really planted a lot of new trees in the cities, but how to manage them and what we can do in the next coming 10 years, it is also a very urgent challenges for us. And the government and also the citizens, they really need more evidence to prove that the trees really can bring the different benefits for the city and also the citizens. So more technologies are needed. So here, just 2 pictures I show. The first one is the old city center, the Forbidden City. So you can see the trees around the cities, and another is the new suburban sub-city center. So the government will protect the previous urban and green space first, and then develop the cities. It is really good 2 pictures I want to show you. So for more information about this program, please feel free to come and discuss after this session. That's all about my talk. Thank you.
Perfect timing again, so no pressure, Anna.
Thank you very much. I'll try to stick to the big button. Yeah, thanks. Yes, I will talk about some of the findings and insights that we have produced in REGREEN on the governance of NBS and with NBS. And first of all, it was a really interesting journey, and working with NBS in a governance, policy, politics, planning perspective. showed to be like a goodie box, the goodie bag that we opened up. So even more things came up as we continued the research. And would you mind putting your hand down because your watch is blinding me? Thank you very much. Yeah, and first of all, it was very clear to us that when you talked about urban policy and nature-based solutions, the transformation from being urban nature, just nature, and then going to be a solution that you could integrate in urban policy and planning and politics, made it, revealed the very political nature of this. And this aspect also comprised some of the contested ideas about what nature is, the role of humans in relation to nature, ecosystems, and as Clive also alluded to, the different namings of the NBS, ecosystem services or blue and green spaces, etc., etc. And this was something we found across our case studies. Also, it was the political aspects were very clear because in cities, as our case studies were in, this was the space is limited, territory is limited. So when you're doing a nature-based solution, even though these are at the core multifunctional and there are co-benefits, it's still some interests are more. It's better for some people and groups in the city than others. Yes, and then we had some interactive walkable floor mats, which I'll come back to later, that sort of provided a platform for addressing these political aspects. Another thing that was very clear to us and which came up quite early on in our work in the cities was the significance of policy entrepreneurs, or the activists within public administrations and policy institutions that really worked for integrating nature, that tried to address it across the different sectors of policy making, where policy is developed and planning is developed in silos, which would very often be contrary to the co-benefits. And these policy entrepreneurs or inside activists, as we started working with them, had a really significant role in bringing nature-based solutions up on their political agendas. With the activism around nature-based solutions, it was also a way to integrate the public opinion in participatory processes, and the public interest and needs and desires for more nature, and what types of nature, and what is nature to them. And furthermore, it was also quite evident that it had to be adapted to the individual city, so there was no single way of saying this kind of nature-based solution works everywhere. So for, yes, for one of the things that we were addressing quite intensely was how nature-based solutions, because it challenges and it changes the way that policy and city spaces and the urban areas are perceived and worked with in the public administrations, then how this could stimulate and lead to and prompt learning that was directed towards the major challenges and the significant problems related to green transitions and to the massive challenges related to climate adaptation, mitigation, biodiversity, but also social equity and livability and cohesion across cities. So this policy learning that could or that may lead to policy change, to address this and investigate this, we use the interactive walkable floor maps. And because these are these huge 40 square meter floor maps where you actually walk around in the city and you sort of get a feel for the nature, the green and blue spaces. It also it could also be a platform for addressing some of the difficulties in relation to the political level for the policymakers. And it would also reveal and integrate in the policy learning the co-benefits for other sectors. So it would bridge across the different silos of policymaking. And furthermore, these would also better equip and increase the capacity of the public administrations for making policy, public participatory processes where you could address the needs of communities and citizen groups in relation to nature. And lastly, this would also be a way to bridge different timescales, because with these approaches, you could address the immediate challenges, but also in a longer time perspective, have a more strategic perspective on how to use urban nature in solutions to the urban problems. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Before I start, I forgot to mention Kelly Dye on the contributors to this presentation. Kelly is in China. She was with ICLEI, and she did a lot of the case study work on the aspects of public participation and governance. As Clive said when we opened up, he said, before you know where you are, you have to know where you're coming from. And we have to realize China, first of all, as about 20% of the global population, and that modern China is not more than 50 years old. And when we talk of China in 5 minutes and public participation, we look at a very different China moving from west towards east. I think you can say we're moving from traditional China to modern China. If you move from urban areas to rural areas, then you're moving from, let's say, modern concepts, or sorry, traditional concepts, moving towards modern concepts. And these small bands of these purple areas is actually the area where we're working in, which is really the heart of, I'd say, modern thinking and awareness, that eastern seaboard area where we're looking at public participation in nature-based solutions. So I reduced my 9 slides to 1, and this is it. I use the word mindset, but I think it's a not really appropriate word, but how to change the mindset. And what Professor Xiaobing said in his concluding statement, what he can learn from the West is aspects of public participation in nature-based solutions. First of all, policy. Well, China came up with its environmental protection law in 2015, and I would say that this law, this policy, was probably one of the most brilliant pieces of documentation that ever came out. It had 3 aspects. One was the right to participate, the right to environmental information, and the right to justice. It means using environmental courts in case of need. It even added the aspect of corporate environmental responsibility. So it meant that this documentation was really, when it came out, I felt this sort of elation that at last something is going to change. It's very much akin to the Aarhus Convention. However, one has expectations, and then there's the reality. So what happened in that process of reality? So then looking at, first of all, if you participate, you need information. Where is this information? The government had to provide the information for this to happen. And if you look on the government websites, you find it only has a handful of clicks for the whole of China, and that the information is really user-unfriendly. So what was happening was that the NGOs were coming in, translating the information that was available and putting it into a user-friendly version. And this was key to providing information. In fact, in the Ningbo Sponge City project, one thing the local government did was to provide information to the public, and I think that was very important. We talk about top-down systems, and top-down systems, yes, top-down it is, but I think more important is this aloofness of government to the people. If you look at the European system, it's much more on an even level, but here there's a certain aloofness there, and that is problematic. And the saying goes that you may know what you want, but I know what you need. And then there's the public themselves. What you see in the public is the public are reticent to participate. The government knows better. The government has done it for us before. They will do it for us now. And so you get this process of tokenism and listening to the public views, but not taking it on board. Then one aspect I'd like to folks look at on is public-private partnerships, and I think it's very interesting. There's a case study in Lihu Lake, highly polluted, and a partnership formed between the local government and the private real estate sector. And they cleaned up the lake. Property prices went up between 70% and 1,000%. And as a result, it was advantaged. Tourism came to the area. It gave work to people who were originally farmers, and it didn't cost the government a penny. So if there's any take-home message here from China to Europe, I think this is a very interesting aspect of public and private participant. Finally, small is beautiful. We see these macro projects coming down, the Sponge City project, 18 cities, et cetera, It's very, very difficult for the public to be involved in that. But when you come down to a micro project, and you have this concept of gated compounds in China, and this is not gated compounds for the elite, it's for the average person living in a compound, vacant areas of land, and that's where change is happening at the very micro level, turning that compound into a nature-based solution. You need an NGO came in this case, Shanghai Community Project. They came in and they worked with the people. Initially, you get all the symptoms that we have here in Europe. Initially, there's inertia. Oh, no, it's not for me, et cetera. Slowly, you find a key person. He's involved in it, retired people, and then they start building this nature-based solutions in these compound areas. And I think this is the starting point. One final word. China needs people in social sciences to deliver. How do you get public participation? I think much more action. The government really doesn't have an idea on how to do it. They pass down the message from top to bottom, but how do you do public participation? This is important.
Thank you to all our panelists who gave a really good example of the spread of studies and different findings from across the two projects, but also across Europe and China, and I think that was really helpful. We're going to open the floor up to some questions, but I just thought I would try and, probably to help Anders with some of his rapporteuring, to just try and bring up some of the common themes that came through, and then ask a question myself. I mean, to me, across the talks, the issue of conflict came through, whether that was conflict over land, whether it's conflict over the idea, whether it was what I would call the conflict between whether you have a more top-down approach or a more participatory bottom-up approach, but that both of those approaches create conflicts and tensions in and of themselves. The other thing that really came across, I think, was the relationship between public and private, and it does seem that very much from the European case studies that that the public seems to be the area that's driving things. I think we probably get that in China as well, but we also have examples where, you know, where Richard just finished off, where you had the NGO, we also had the companies getting involved. So it's very interesting that you have almost stronger bottom-up participatory processes in the European case studies, but not so much private actors involved, whereas in China we're seeing the reverse relationship. Now, this could be due to our sample size, so there could be some kind of selection bias, but, you know, they're all interesting themes to look at and to think about as we go into the future. For the panelists, I have a question, and it very much ties into these themes, is when we started REGREEN, we actually looked at a literature review around the barriers and enablers of nature-based solutions. And one of the things that was very unclear in the literature was whether some studies said that very localized participatory initiatives got really good results of NBS, and then other studies said, no, you want more kind of top-down, more autocratic approaches, because you just force people to do things. You don't have to worry about, you know, trying to appease all these different stakeholders who get in the way. And we're seeing similar things from what's been said here. So one of the things I'm interested in is what your thoughts are on that, the tension in that debate, and how do we square that circle, as you would say in English? How do we get the best of both worlds based on the experience with the projects? Or can you get the best of both worlds? Or do you just have to take one approach and accept the consequences that manifest from that? So I don't know who would like to start. I give you the really difficult question to start with. Clive?
I'd like to answer the question you first asked, okay, which is about public-private partnership, and then I'll try my best on the second one. I think there is some pretty good examples in Europe of public-private partnerships, but what I would say, it's to do with available capital. In cities like London and Paris and places where there's a high amount of property wealth, it is much easier to persuade developers to participate in things that add value to their real estate. But when you're in less economically, how can I put it, more economically challenged areas, I think it is much more difficult. So I think there's a rule in certain situations that doesn't apply in other situations. I think that's what I would say. I'm going to have to ask you to rephrase your question, because I was desperate to get an answer into that one. What was your... It
was about the tension between whether you have a more top-down
yes, or a more bottom-up. I'm not sure there's a right answer to that question. What I would say, though, and I hope it's a helpful contribution, is about, in English, we use the word ownership. Sometimes it means the physical ownership, like you own your house, or it's usually the bank that owns your house, by the way. But anyway, you own your house. But we also use it as a way of explaining that people feel an ownership of something. And I think that the great advantage of the bottom-up community participation is that sense that people own something, and that therefore they feel an investment in it. I think the difficulty with the top-down approach is that people, if you've superimposed something on people, they don't necessarily feel that ownership. Maybe it can be retrofitted, that's possible, and I think there are probably some good examples of that. But I would say that the big advantage is to do with people buying into the idea. And I was very taken, actually, by Richard's slide about small is beautiful, because to my mind, that is where community participation often really works well. The challenge, I think, and it's the challenge not just in China, but in Europe, where we've got, I don't know, is it 3 billion or 10 billion trees? However many trees they want planted, doesn't really matter, it's just a big number, is that actually those big numbers can probably only ever be delivered top down. And which is why I think for me, I'm moving on a journey from thinking purely in terms of quantity to thinking in terms of environmental quality. Because I really do worry that we think if we stick 1,000 trees in the ground, that there are 1,000 young trees, but what about that big tree that's already delivering lots of ecosystem services? So maybe this project has been a journey for the researchers as well as for the people that we've been interviewing and talking. Sorry, it's a long answer. Oh, sorry, Anna.
Okay, thank you, and also for this quite challenging, but also really important question and very apt. And I don't think we should think about it as either or, either top down or bottom up from with public participation, but rather look at the different aspects of introducing nature-based solutions and actually what is nature-based solutions. Because in some cities, in some areas, there's the capacity, there's a drive among the public to actually implement and develop and do nature-based solutions, but to rely on that this would be the driver for increasing the green of cities, biodiversity, livability, I think would be a little bit risky, especially within the time frame we have for the biodiversity. At the same time, if you only have it, not only, but if you mainly focus on a top-down approach, it might never leave the desk table of the public administrators. And as a second aspect, I think there's also an element of trust. So do you actually really, both as a citizen, but also as a public governor, trust that people can actually take care of this by themselves, that they have input that are worth investing in, and also trust among the people in the city that the public planners, the public policymakers will actually benefit nature as well. And the last aspect I think we should consider here is also the changing role of public administrators, of planners, of policymakers, from a role more as a top-down enforcement or implementation agent to a more meta-governance, where the key thing is actually to strive for or work for a common objective or a common direction in where you want to go with the city. Because public participation is necessary, but to expect that public participation always has the right answer can be quite risky when it's something so valuable at stake as the climate or nature or social equality. Yes.
Okay, so yeah, there's nothing wrong with top-down. I mean, we have it in Europe. You take the European Commission with their directives. I think specifically of the Water Framework Directive. All river basins in Europe have to reach reasonable ecological status by, I think, 2018, 2015. In China, had its Sponge City program. It had 18 pilot cities, and then expanded to 30 pilot cities. I mean, obviously, the idea was thought out at the upper level, considering the situation that we need to implement one or other of these policies. The question is that there are many pitfalls along the way. In the Sponge City program, one of the pitfalls was the concept that one size fits all. And of course, you've got different climate regimes, different topographies, different geologies, and so on, and you cannot apply one size fits all for the whole country. And therefore, applying any program has to be with integrity. And the question is, how do you get the public on board? I mean, on a macro scale, you can say, well, it's not possible. By the time you get to the micro scale, I mean down to the lower level, that this is where we're going to have, let's say, a pond for infiltration so that we don't have excessive floods, or it's bringing people together. And I know, for example, in the Water Framework Directive, you had a river basin where Holland was blaming Germany for using it as a sewer and so on and so forth. Working groups coming together, experts in different fields from the different countries, and initially conflict, but afterwards there was understanding, and okay, how can we do that? How can we work together? So I think at all levels it is possible to have a participatory process, whether it be the public involved or experts or decision makers.
Thank you. So also for me, it is really hard to say which is more important, but I think the most important thing is collaborative together, because I mean, the top-down strategies or the public participation should be involved in different stages in the whole cycle of the implementation of the nature-based solutions. For example, in China, usually the government knows where the land, I mean, the governance knows the land use regulation things. They know where they can plant more trees. They know where they can convert the gray area, the gray space to the green space, where they can reconnect the previous forest with the new afforestation. But for the citizens, usually they only want to enjoy their neighborhood urban green space. So I used to discuss with my friends in some forestry bureau. So usually they have the mayor channel for the citizens. So in their department, they usually have they will receive a lot of feedback from the local citizens. They want to more green space around their local communities, but for that kind, but they don't know if this place is right for trees, or they can like convert this place to the green space. So the government is really important to see the general land use regulation based on a more large scale, based on the city area. But they really need the feedbacks from their local government, local communities, and also the citizens. They want the citizens to enjoy the green space, to enjoy the benefits provided by the urban trees. So it is like two feedback systems. And also another really important is the government really want to encourage it. I mean, according to my own experience, our research institute also collaborate with the local forestry bureau to monitoring the nature-based solutions in a lot of cities. So when we talk about the citizen participation in China, so they really mentioned that they really need more diversity ways to encourage people to join them. So the most formal things they did is they just posted the plan in their website, and actually anyone can download, can click into the link with the link and download all the materials. But for citizens, they really don't have time to, like, I want to access the website and review the plans and to provide more feedbacks. So more changes are needed in China still. Maybe they can collaborate with the universities and also some research academic institutions, also NGOs, to create more a method to convert the very boring words to some very nice figures, to some maps, and let our citizens to understand why they want to plant trees in this area, and to bring more feedbacks from them. So it is really important.
Yeah. So we'll open up the floor to some questions. So we have this lady here on the left, and then we'll take two questions, and Jeppe as well. So yeah.
Hi, thanks. Sarah Millican, University of Greenwich in London. A question inspired by something that Richard said about an intervention leading to an increase in property values. And we know that an increase in property values can often lead then to gentrification, where the more socio-economically disadvantaged are forced to move out of an area due to rise in rents. Classic example being Bosco Verticale in Milan, but there are many examples that I know of across Europe. So my question for both projects really is, in your work on governance, did you come across examples where gentrification managed to be avoided because of the particular kind of governance that was in play? Thank you.
Can I collect another question as well? So there's one on gentrification, and we'll take Yepad, so then we... Yep.
Yes, first of all, thank you for your very interesting presentation. It reminds me very much about something I did in the 90s, where the concept urban ecology was hot, at least in Denmark, and where I experienced several things. One thing was that urban ecology more or less became building ecology. So it was split up in projects like you talked about, Clive, rather than more large-scale planning. I also saw that there was this gap between the municipality officers and their identity and their approach compared to the civic society and the engaged citizen there, especially those who are very enthusiastic. And at that time, I found that the way the local governments try to involve people was more kind of short events, meetings, workshops. And then there were a few citizens there, and they had a good process, but it was like a soap bubble. It has no integration in any process. So what I was interested in was the possibility of establishing a mediating level, or some mediators, some process facilitators that could help the dialogue and the interaction between the planners and the citizens, to make it simple. And what I also found that we had national program for some kind of green guides that could play that role, but they were not educated for that. They were not educated to actually promote this interaction. So what was needed was both space and resources for it, but also some competent change agents to bring in and make a kind of social learning over some years. There have been some examples in Denmark. For example, an island that became totally renewable. It took many years before they came there, but they have this kind of mediating level. So I would like you to comment on whether you have met something like that in your project here.
Okay, thank you. So we have the question on gentrification, and we also have a question on mediation or mediators between planners and citizens or other stakeholders, and around competence as well, actually having competent people to help with that. So, I think Anna said she wanted to answer one. Richard, you had to, I suppose everyone, so I'll just pass the mic down and then we can go that way.
Yes, thank you for these questions. And Jeppe, I think you know what I would reply with Aarhus, so I won't do it. But I'll go on to your question about gentrification and the role of urban nature in pushing a social inequity related to gentrified cities. Because one of our case studies, Aarhus municipality, I don't see anyone here from Aarhus, but
Safe to answer.
it's safe to answer, yeah. But they actually use nature-based solutions and greening of the city as a way to lift deprived areas and integrate some of the ghetto areas with very challenged communities with the more affluent housing areas very nearby. Not only through creating corridors with nature in relation to especially climate adaptation, but also recreation, etc. But also in providing access to green spaces that existed already, but were experienced as unsafe and not inviting to be there. So here it actually had the other way around. And at a general level, I think you need to think about it in terms of it being part of the solution thing rather than something related to adding an extra problem. And in order to think of it as one of the solutions, one of the co-benefits related to nature-based solutions, it has to be prioritized politically. So if you go for nature, more nature in the city, not just to focus it on areas that will be gentrified, but also some of the areas that are usually overlooked, communities that are hard to reach with the participatory processes, etc. If that replies to it, that's just one aspect. But yeah.
Two really good questions. I'll come to this one first, if I may. I work for much of my working life in a school that includes young planners in training. I spend an awful lot of my life trying to teach these planners what I think is some of the first rules about seeing their role as enablers and facilitators. After 4 years, they leave full of enthusiasm. And then 2 years later, they come back to me and they tell me what life's like in the real world, which is that the organization wears them down. And I think there's a structural problem within local government, certainly in many European countries, which transcends the individuals. So if you're sending out people ready to use that term, rock and roll, and they come back wanting to do the waltz, then you know you've really kind of got a systematic problem. And in that respect, I think there is a particular role for facilitators. Because what a facilitator can do, if they're an external facilitator, is they can come in and say the things that matter, and then leave, hopefully getting paid in the process. Make sure you get paid in advance of the facilitation, would be my best advice to you. And say the things that sometimes are hard truths. And I think that's really important. Turning to gentrification, there is no doubt that gentrification is already a process. I mean, you know, take London, your city. I mean, you know, the greenest neighborhoods are also the wealthiest neighborhoods, the most prestigious neighborhoods. What has interested me, though, and my daughter lives in Bristol, another fairly kind of upmarket sort of city, and the neighborhood she lives in, it's still property prices still quite high, is actually what I would call a hipster neighborhood. There's lots of community things going on. You know, there's a cafe down the street called The Revolution, and there's people who work there are punks. You know, and I love it. I love nothing better than having a coffee served by a punk. But the point is that there are still green spaces there, but they're tiny, and sadly, they're not very well managed. And I actually think that we can still find ways of keeping communities together without necessarily going the Chelsea or the Kensington or the thing. So there is green gentrification. It will always happen, but I think we can perhaps ameliorate it if we go into these things with our eyes open. I'd probably talk myself out of a job, actually, so I hope it's not going live. You can edit it later.
Thank you. So, actually, when I first heard these words, and like 3 years ago, and I thought maybe China has really different, has similar words, but maybe different, different things I can describe. For example, so recently the Chinese, a lot of people in China, they really care about the corridors between the city, between the urban and peri-urban area and also rural area. But recently, they really care about the landscape of urban forest and the peri-urban forest. That's because they a lot of them they found the losing of the green space in the countryside. It made them to feel like they really need to something to bring them back to their their memory of their childhood. A lot of their homesick memories, it is about the trees, maybe the trees in their garden when they are in the countryside, and the more like fruit trees around their small villages. So in recent years, a lot of people and also the government started to think about how to rebuild the homesickness landscape in the countryside. And also when they come to these like mental like benefits from the trees in the countryside, I think that's also something really important between the really important that link the cities, the trees in the cities, and also the trees in the more remote area. And for another thing is also we have I mentioned before that we also have we need more changes regarding the local group, the local community group participation, because usually in China it will be really hard to encourage people to get together to speak out some more really important things that really matter themselves. So I didn't see some other cases in that government did, but my colleagues from FAFU and also from the Beijing Forest University, this kind of researchers, they start to try to learn more, try to convert more like attractive way to let more people to join them. For example, they will prepare the gift for them. Maybe it's like just a small like fruit or eggs, something like that, and to attract them to come here to say to say something more. And the researchers will also introduce more about the project and the reasons and the potential results and what benefits they can get from this project, and try to use another way, just like friends you you discuss with each other, just like to make a more relaxed environment to make them to feel like okay, we just talk about these things and we want to say something more we really care about. I think the way how to make them more relaxed when you talk about the more important things about the green nature-based solutions project, it will be more important.
So first of all, the question on gentrification. So basically, I interpret the question is, how do you change winners becoming losers, or winners and losers to winners and winners? And I'm giving the example of which I brought up here was Lihu Lake, which was restored from water pollution, and therefore, and as a result, the property prices went up and increased tourism and so on. But what I omitted to say was about, I think, 289 enterprises were demolished, 5,180 hectares of farmland was consumed, and I can't remember the number of farm households which were taken also. So how do you deal with that? The way that the local government dealt with it, first of all, they gave all the farmers what's called hukou, which is the wuxi town, they're given residency, and this is like a prized possession. In Chinese terms, it allows you to work, it gives you a place you can buy all kinds of things. So that was one prize. Secondly, because of the increase of the tourist industry, the people who had lost their land were employed in the tourist industry, and so they were given jobs. And of course, there was compensation for the land and the houses which were destroyed and so on. So I'm sure that there are probably aberrations in that system, but ultimately it was trying to change it into a win-win situation rather than they are winners and losers. So that's an example. The whole thing of public participation, getting them involved, how to do it, mediators and so on. In my perspective in China, I mean, I wouldn't give it to the Chinese government to have public participation. I think they're hopeless, you know. You know, and I think the public are not really in a position to come together or to say, yes, we want this, we want that, or we don't want this. I think the idea of mediators or NGOs who can facilitate and to work together with the public and then generate what the public thinking of that and act as a representation to the government, I think, at least from a Chinese perspective, that would be a way to get the public voice in nature-based solutions. Since I have the microphone, just one final word. I don't believe that the government can do it alone, and they've got vast areas which need to be covered. To do it by their own is taking too much, and so the people have to be involved in it to make a change in terms of nature-based solutions.
Okay, we had another person from the floor, and I also want to check if there's anyone online. Is there anyone online, Caroline? And then there was someone who had their hand up earlier, over there. Yeah, okay. So if we do the online one and collect that one as well.
So yeah, this is an online question. It actually follows on well from what Rich has been saying. Someone's asking about really the nuts and bolts of building community. How do you build community? How do you build public engagement? How do you include citizens, educators, schools, students, policymakers, entrepreneurs? Do people have any experience they'd like to share on this?
Okay, that's a research field project, but let's collect that, and then let's collect the one over here as well. And then.
Hello, thank you. Yeah, thank you for all your words. I also wanted to ask, we've been talking a lot about public and private and involving people and so on and so on. And I wanted to ask all these examples around cooperatives and commons and common communal lands and so on, and where people are actually, especially for renewable energies, involved also in the profits of those solutions. And even if they don't have a job, but just because they live in that community, they are included in the profits which are generated. How could this be applied to nature-based solutions? Is there any examples in this where it's neither public or private, but it's actually a cooperative style involvement of the public?
Okay, so then we have the question, yeah, it's a really good question, on cooperatives, the in-between space between public and private. I want to give us enough time to refresh before the next session, so we'll probably want to tie this up in the next 10 to 15 minutes. So if I can ask the panelists to be really insightful but quick in their, in their responses. And I'll start with Richard first, because he's been the last most times, and then we can pass the mic back that way.
Well, yeah, with the time limitation, I'd just like to work on Caroline's question about how do you do it, and I thought this case of the Shanghai Community Garden was very interesting, because the idea of having an MBS project in this local gated compound was very interesting. First of all, it was an NGO. In fact, it was an international NGO, the Nature Conservatory, conservancy that came in. They worked with a local NGO, and as I mentioned earlier, there was this kind of inertia, you know, yeah, what are you talking about? No one's interested, you know. And then there was just one key person from the local community, and he had the enthusiasm, and he built up the enthusiasm of others, and that generated the momentum. And then the next stage in the process was, you know, what's in it for me? So you had all these different people involved, and then some people would say, well, you know, I want to grow my own vegetables so I can, it would be organic and so on and so forth. Another person said, no, let's have bees or something like that. So then all the discussion and the self-interest come around. But eventually, and then of course the management, who manages it? Where's the funding coming from? And the interesting thing that the government was out of the picture, which is unusual in China. And once it generated momentum, the process was replicated in other communities in the locality. And as I mentioned, gated compounds are a very common feature for living areas. So that was the process, and I think it was very interesting that it did work. But it has all the characteristics of this, I think, a similar process that we would have in Europe. Yeah. So that's my comment on that. Yeah. I'm sorry, I will talk to Julius.
Yeah, actually, so we also have similar case in Beijing and also in Fuzhou trail case study, which we already present in our previous webinar. So actually, so usually the government, I mean, when the citizens, I mean, the individual groups to communicate, to try to communicate with the government, it will usually make them quite nervous, and they will think more, I mean, they will really think if I should tell something more or something really concern myself. So if we just, collaborate with the researchers, the academic institutions, the researchers, the NGOs, then to convert this kind of dialogue, to make them more relaxed, it will be really helpful. It happened in our Beijing afforestation program. So the government, at the very early stage, actually the government just want to plant more trees. But you know, so this project was launched in 2012, and then after the first round of the afforestation, the government found, okay, the citizens really care about this afforestation. They really care about where the tree will be planted. So the government started to think about, we need to learn more feedbacks from the local communities. And then they just try to collaborate with the research institute and also the university to monitoring the next round of new afforestation. They try to also monitoring the feedbacks from the public. They really care about what they're thinking. And for example, where they need more green space, and if they think this tree species is really good, because you know, this ecosystem surveys also pay, I mean, the citizens also now really really pay more attention on the pollen and capturing things, because it will make them more feel very uncomfortable. So the government really want to know if the citizens really like this kind of species, this kind of trees, this kind of sceneries. So it is really important, yeah.
I feel a lecture coming on, so I'm going to not do it. Chair probably deeply relieved at that. I think anybody who sets out to create a community or to build a community is almost certainly destined to fail. Communities, to me, create themselves. And there's been attempts, a mention made earlier today in the UK about the the creation of kind of new towns, a big process in the 1950s and 60s, and talk of a new generation of them. They were full of all sorts of experiments, but mostly communities form themselves. So I think that's a really important point. but it's a debatable point. I'm really interested in your question about commons, because I actually think this is something that is quite a radical thought line. One of our case studies has its roots in a commons, and that's Bosco and Città in the suburbs of Milan, which started as a community initiative wanting to do something. And to the point where originally the local municipality, the city of Milan, just didn't want anything to do with it. But eventually thought, well, actually there's something going on here, and gradually got more and more involved, and then eventually committed to it, and is actually now putting money into it. And it's become quite a famous example, really, of a kind of a commons project driving a local authority, rather than the local authority driving a commons project. I think that's a really good place. And if you're in Milan, you know, go and have a look. I think it's really interesting. But actually, I think there is a definite role for commons. I'm quite into the whole guerrilla space idea that people should sometimes feel empowered. And I'd just like to give you a UK example that really hit me recently. The city of Hull, Kingston upon Hull, big city in East Yorkshire of England on the East Coast, recently passed a motion which said that any council land can be appropriated for growing vegetables. Now, to me, that's pretty impressive, that the council has given effectively. Now, I'm sure there'll be lots of arguments, but the idea that you can take a simple policy decision and say, you know, if you want to grow vegetables on our ground, you can do it, I think is a really good idea, actually. And yeah, I can see conflicts, but, you know, I think it's still a good way forward.
Thank you very much. And also for these two excellent questions. And I'll start with the online one that you mentioned, Caroline. And I'd actually contradict a little bit that you cannot create communities, because this is what has happened over the past 200 years with nation states and what's happening now with the EU. And this, if you look at it as imagined communities, then it's actually something that you can support and which doesn't, and which also grows from, of course, also grows from below. But if you want to stimulate the creation of communities, and you think about it as imagined communities, and this is based in the literature, which I will not give another lecture on, like you were talking about. Then it's about creating a common vision about what it is that the community builds around. A common language, common identities and roles within this, common norms, and you cannot just do that from the outside. But what you can do actually is to pick up on existing communities and extend what the community centers on to also include some urban nature, for example, and this actually moves a bit over to your question about cooperatives, because if you look at cooperatives as one of the ambassadors or one of the types of actors, collective actors that can push forward and work for nature-based solutions or urban nature or biodiversity, then they exist many places. Like, I'm from Denmark, and in Denmark we have like housing communities where they have common public spaces within the housing community, and this is not public at all, but it's governed by the cooperative that owns the land. So all the grass and gardens and vegetables and whatever is common and owned by the cooperative. In the cities, for example, you have green roofs on the top of cooperative housing buildings, and that's not public at all either. And this is a community around housing that extends to also involve green spaces and what we call nature-based solutions when we work with it in public administration and public planning and public policy. And from a public policy perspective, it's also about the role that you have as public policymakers. And if you, when you look at cases where the public policymakers pulls back and say, okay, here's I think one of you mentioned it also, here's a space, a green space, where you can, people who want to make allotment gardens or who want to have it as a pocket park or something, they can take ownership of this. Then you can also have it in a, managed in a way that resembles a cooperative, whether it's a formal cooperative or not. And this happens many places, and in many cities, not only the ones that we have, not everywhere, far from everywhere, but it happens many places, which goes also back to one of the initial points about many nature-based solutions exist that are not called nature-based solutions. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I think, so to be humane to everyone, to let them stretch their legs before the final session, we will finish this session. But first of all, I just want to give a round of applause to the excellent panelists again for their presentations and their really thoughtful answers. So thank you.
Hello. Can I have your attention, please? Could you please find a seat? Could you please find a seat already? And then we can start the last session of today. And it will be the most important part, I will say, of the day. And probably I can invite the reporter for each session to come up to the stage. The first one is Nature-Based Solution Innovation for Climate Action. Let's welcome the reporter Anders Petersen. Are you here? Yes. And the second reporter would be Regreening Cities. That would be Julius Knopp. And then the next one would be, for what? I got this the last minute. Okay, so, but I know who the reporter is Marcus? Where it is. Okay, so, and then the next one will be the parallel session of this afternoon. The first one is policy governance and institutional issues related to nature-based solution. Clive, please. And then we have also most important person, also the Julius Knopp for the second session. That will be the environmental aspect of a nature-based solution. And the last one, but of course not that will be Maria Spania. That's for the ecological quality of nature-based solution. Okay, so even though we are about 10 minutes late, delayed a little bit, but I will make sure that we will finish on time. And we will go 2 rounds. First, I will invite each reporter to just present a summary of the most important highlight of your session. Probably we can start from the first one, that's nature-based solution, innovation for climate actions.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you very much. So, as you will know, we had a very good start on the day in the morning panel. So some of the highlights for me, I'll take them in the order which we got the presentations. First, Marco Fritz told us about that he found that the idea to bring European and Chinese funding on nature-based solutions together has proved fruitful, which has been demonstrated through these 2 projects. So that's good news for REGREEN and Clearing House. And I marked that the EU will open up for some international networking activities where these activities can be continued. So China and Europe could continue to learn from each other through this type of projects. Then we had Boyko on a quite moobly connection, but we got some of the information from Boyko. So Boyko is in the delegation of the EU to China. And Boyko also focused on some of the same aspects as Marco, that both from the EU and China there's a will to address climate change and to promote nature-based solutions, and that it's of very high importance to support this through research-based expert advice, for instance through projects like Clearing House and REGREEN. Then we had Karin Saunberger from DG Environment. Karin focused on the biodiversity problems, and climate change problems cannot be solved in isolation, so we need to think solutions together. Karin also mentioned that we have to make a cost-benefit analysis, but it's still important. We can't repeat it enough to not forgetting about social benefits and public participation benefits. And it was also mentioned during the discussions the importance of leaving nobody behind, which has become a prime focus also of the EU. Then we had Ben Kasper also from DG Environment. Ben, he focused on the nature-based solutions policy framework is increasing in importance. Nature and biodiversity are incredibly important for the EU. And it's important to focus on that the solutions are not only about parks in the cities, but thinking urban biodiversity more broadly. So I think it was an important message also from Ben that the EU is now moving more away from the voluntary targets in the biodiversity strategy of 2030 and more towards legally binding targets. So hopefully it can make a bigger impact, the new strategy, compared to the one ending in 25. Then there was some discussions about what is a satisfactory level in urban ecosystems, and the fact that we need to avoid policies that are not coherent. And to end this wrap-up, I would repeat Karin's words: implementation, and accelerating implementation.
Okay, I'll try and do the recap of the second session of today, Regreening Cities with Nature-Based Solutions in Europe and China. I'll go through some of the highlights in no particular order because some of them were overlapping anyway. Some of the key quotes we've heard today is that we really need to address, and this was also highlighted at the start of the first session with the first speaker, Alberto, is to address in general the non-sustainable urbanization patterns in which we are seeing today on the global scale. And here it is very important that the projects present here, both Clearing House and REGREEN, what they've stressed multiple times throughout their talks is the close collaboration with the Urban Living Labs. This is really, really helpful, integrating the knowledge the researchers have and the practitioners alike into implementing nature-based solutions, being it in a more general sense or either in urban forests as one particular element of that. Then it was also stressed that the collaboration between Europe and China has been very fruitful. We have seen both perspectives from the EU and also from China through Bin Zhao's speech. So that has been like one of the other highlights I wanted to mention here. And then there's still room for improvement. So we still have some time if we think about that the major urban centers, I think I'm quoting Rick over here, they are yet to be built. The major urban centers of 2050 are yet to be built, excuse me. So there's still some time to implement these changes. And for that, we need a really successful engagement of stakeholders, awareness raising, training for citizens and schools alike. So it's a really multifaceted approach which we need to take here. And this can be done, for instance, by what the Chinese colleagues have established in collaboration with the European colleagues, for instance, the joint training of PhD students. So as Bin Zhao mentioned, putting an additional E into the STEM. So also including ecology into sciences, technicians, engineering, and mathematics, that is. We also looked at some of the ground impact examples, which we can already see by now. So for instance, we heard some development about Paris region, for instance, where some of the findings from the REGREEN project helped to shape a new nature agency in Ile-de-France looking into depaving. So that is part of the impact which REGREEN has had. Then the current zoning plan for Croatia, for Velika Gorica, which was also talked about by Gordana in the last parallel session, which they have adapted, and also the surface water quality improvement, which Aarhus municipality wants to write in their upcoming municipal plan of 2025. I think, I don't know, I would probably give the microphone to the left.
Thank you.
Okay, so the third session of today was linked to enabling transformation in urban areas with nature-based solutions. So in brief, it was a rather broad discussion there about linked to enabling transitions, highlighting the importance of transdisciplinary, local engagement, co-creation, political awareness, and also horizontal cooperation. That's in brief. So there was an emphasis on local engagement and education. There was a consensus on the importance of engaging local people through, for example, education and co-creation. Yet, not only local engagement was emphasized, but also that nature-based solution is dependent on the context and the specific prerequisites on one place. For example, a small city is different from a larger city. Ways forward is to educate about nature-based solution. There is a large impact on schools and university educating younger people, but it's also very then important to include practitioners and entrepreneurs. Education is also important to strengthen the nature-positive thinking, to quote today. There was an important horizontal cooperation, highlighting the importance of cooperation with other projects, keeping the communications lines open between the projects, and not also see us as competitors. Building communities of practice so that outcomes from projects complement each other. There were also some identification of challenges. There was challenges in the financial gaps that were highlighted. Fundings from NBS is scarce and now mainly comes from the public sector. There is a need to cooperate with the private investors. And there were also some figures mentioned. I'm not sure if I remember them to mention here, but I find or remember or notice this one, that there is a need to triple the investments by NBS by 2030. There's a challenge of political awareness. Nature-based solution is competing with many other demands at the time. We have to be super aware of the political landscape. And the final challenge was like the IRL, like in real life. We need to be aware that there are social economic realities in major cities competing with nature-based implementations. Also, for example, from South America, that there are rather big political changes in short times at different local and regional scales, as an example.
Okay, thank you. And Clive, I was told to remind you that you have only 10 seconds.
Well, the main highlight was that I was in the session. Round of applause, not necessary. You're not serious, are you? 10 seconds. Oh, I've finished.
No, you have 2 minutes.
Very quickly. Governance and institutions was the kind of the theme. And actually, it struck me, particularly listening to you, that there is actually something in this that has kind of run as a bit of a golden thread throughout the day. We talked probably relatively to be anticipated on the sort of top-down, bottom-up nature of governance. And that isn't a simple, well, in China it's this, in Europe it's that. It's more complicated about that. We talked also about the need for more private sector engagement, which seemed to be a weakness. There were some examples given of where the private sector has been involved, but that led to a follow-up point around, is there a danger of green gentrification which, because the private sector may well be wanting to add value to its real estate. We talked about the role of the planner, and particularly the planner is what I've described as an enabler and a facilitator, rather than necessarily as a person who is a simple decision maker. The role of non-governmental organizations was mentioned. I think it's important that we sometimes talk a bit about public and private, but NGOs have a key role. And beneath that, probably the role of communities. That led to a discussion about commons and people perhaps appropriating land for their own nature-based solutions, which I thought was really interesting. We had some really good examples given of projects in both China and in Europe. I quoted, just as an example, Bosco and Città in Milan as a particularly inspiring example of a bottom-up approach which had led to the local authority deciding it needed to get in on the act. I think I've had 10 seconds.
Yes, that's your 10 seconds. Probably
Clap now if you want.
Yeah. Can we invite Julius to talk about the second session related in the afternoon? That's the environmental aspect of NBS first, and then the lady last.
Okay, sure. So I'm first, apparently. So the title of one of the parallel sessions, which took place just before that, was the environmental aspects of nature-based solution and restoration. And to be very short, because I think we are running low on time, it was a big recap of all the models, guidelines, tools, scenarios which have been developed both in REGREEN and Clearing House, that is, of course. The ULL-specific challenges we faced, combining the different models, how to approach them. Do we want to make the outcomes more, more practitioner-related or more science community-related then? And from this, we had a very nice panel discussion which developed in the aftermath. And the main question there was, how will you use some of these products and results in your city? So we had representatives from Krakow, Barcelona, I'm not able to spot them in the audience, I'm sorry, one from Velika Gorica and one from Aarhus, and they were all asked this same question. And for Barcelona ULL, it was definitely the systematic definition of functions in urban forests, having this clear concept as a baseline, which was really useful for them. As far as Aarhus municipality goes, they have been really intrigued by the models which we did on water courses and on water quality in particular, with how the riparian woodland can impact the water quality. And since, as any other municipality in Europe has to adhere to the EU Water Framework Directive at some point in the future, they are looking into also integrating this into their municipal plan in 2025, which I mentioned before, I think. As for Velika Gorica, they were particularly keen on the heat maps, which we developed. Heat maps meaning here actual temperature maps, from which they gathered that there's actually a big need in regreening and rethinking their green space strategy and establishing more green spaces, and also looking into how the green spaces which they actually have are managed. That was one of the key points from this ULL. And then lastly, from Krakow, we heard that they were actually in a very fortunate position where they have participated in a couple of projects already, where they are now in a position to actually compare different model outcomes, which puts them in a position then again to potentially help other cities which might not have had this access to other projects. Yeah.
Thank you. And then our most important part.
What do you mean, me again?
If you like.
So I will report the session Ecological Quality of Restoration Activities in NBS, which has been led by Gwendoline Grandin, Marc Barra, Tom Wild, and Dagmar Hase. So, as you will expect, the key concept of this session was the qualitative aspect of ecological restoration. Because indeed, in the context of urbanization, global change, biodiversity loss, it is quite urgent to make cities more welcoming for biodiversity. And in that sense, restoration is a key asset to face these challenges as NBS. What is renaturation? It's returning degraded or destroyed ecosystem because of human activities to natural or semi-natural states. What is not renaturation? It is not greenery, plant focus and aesthetic approach, nor only distilling, but also taking into account all the biodiversity, like in terms of genetic, in terms of functionality, in terms of species that is in the ecosystem. And Gwendoline presented the REGREEN method, which is a mapping tool that can present priority sites for renaturing zone in the Paris region. So what else could I say? Restoration imposes a multi-scalar approach at the city level with connectivity mainly, at the neighbor level with indicators like the ratio of biologically vital areas and so on, and at the building levels with the urban forms, because urban forms do have impacts on the type of biodiversity you can find in ecosystems. So size and connectivity are the two main factors predicting biodiversity in cities, and new tools exist to design those green corridors, but I won't say it now here. So to enhance biodiversity in city, management practices have to incorporate more complexity, more native species, and less management, paradoxically. On trees specifically, Dagmar insisted on the fact that trees are really important as NBS in cities, but they have to be taken into account as nature and not only as tools. And I think that is a key message of the session that has been shared by all the speakers, and it could be resumed by the speech from Tom White, who presented the nature-based thinking as a model development of a new approach, which is less anthropocentered, that see nature and humanity as a whole, connected, and it has to be considered in an interdisciplinary way, in a multi-governance way, and in a multi-scalar way as well. So we have great learning from this session to do with the multi-scalar approach, with the rewilding more than regreenery, and the work on the perception of the citizens of the ecosystem and biodiversity within, which has been a big part of our exchanges after that. It was quite interesting.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all for a nice summary. And now comes to the most important thing. Well, I believe today is a very fruitful discussion, and also, well, we are thinking about what will be the way forward for nature-based solution. We can also think about what will be the future of this Europe-China collaboration from many perspectives. And then the last point is that two messages. One is probably I can invite you to register for tomorrow's field trip. There are 3 different ones, and please do so as soon as possible before the places are gone. And then the last one is that tomorrow morning the registration will start from 8:30 and the meeting will start from 9 on time. I hope that I can see you more. And then please enjoy the wonderful city of Brussels.
Yeah, that's
somebody would have told me that this all the spotlights, I was really like zooming up and
We're actually out snowing. So coming in from the east,